I-28F, growing up, it was just me and my mom. My dad left when I was 5, and she never got over it. She would always say we only had each other, and for most of my life I believed that. I was an only child, and she made sure I knew how much she had sacrificed for me. She would remind me constantly that she never dated seriously because she had to focus on raising me. That wasn't true though. She did date. A lot. But every single one of her boyfriends was awful. Some were emotionally abusive. Some were just losers who never had jobs. Some were straight up addicts. But the pattern was always the same: they would come first, and I would come second. If I ever complained, she would accuse me of being selfish, of not understanding how hard it was for her. When I was 16, I got a full scholarship to a great out-of-state university. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. I was so excited. But when I told my mom, she acted like I had told her I was moving to another country and never coming back. She sobbed. She told me she couldn't handle being alone. She asked how I could abandon her after everything she had done for me. The guilt ate me alive. I turned the scholarship down and went to a local college instead. At 21, I met someone, Sarah. She was kind, smart, and supportive. I thought we had a real future together, but my mom hated her. She would always make little comments about how Sarah was trying to take me away or changing me. Then, my mom got sick. At least, that's what she told me. She acted like she was on the verge of death, so I pulled back from my relationship. I was too busy taking care of my mom. When Sarah tried to talk to me about how unhealthy my relationship with my mother was, my mom convinced me she was being manipulative. I broke up with Sarah. The day after, my mom was miraculously feeling better. That was the moment I started to realize something wasn't right. But by then, I had already lost Sarah. This became a pattern. Every time I got close to someone, my mom would have a crisis. If I talked about moving out, she suddenly had an issue with her heart. If I was happy in a relationship, she would find a way to convince me the person was bad for me. If I even hinted at trying to be more independent, she would guilt-trip me into staying. Meanwhile, she refused to work a stable job. I had to help with the bills while still in college. She would spend recklessly, sometimes on expensive skincare, sometimes on things like home decor she didn't need. If I questioned it, she would get defensive and remind me that I owed her for everything she had done for me. At 26, I finally landed a great job in another city. It was everything I had worked for. I told my mom I was moving. She acted like I had betrayed her. She cried. She called me selfish. She told me she just needed one more year to get on her feet financially. I wanted to say no. I knew this was another manipulation. But the guilt was crushing, and I found myself hesitating, convincing myself it was just one more year. That's how she always got me. Then, 2 years later, I met Emily. She was different. She didn't put up with my mom's nonsense. She saw the manipulation for what it was. For the first time, I had someone in my life who was pushing me to break free. When I told my mom I was moving in with Emily, she lost it. She said Emily was controlling me. She said I was abandoning her. But the worst part? I found out through a cousin that my mom had actually called Emily behind my back. She told her I had a history of cheating and anger issues. Complete lies. Emily was heartbroken. She almost left me over it. That was it. That was my breaking point. I confronted my mother, and she didn't even deny it. She just said she was trying to save me from making a mistake. I made a decision right then and there. I was done. I didn't tell her. I planned everything behind her back. I found an apartment. I transferred my job. I made sure my finances were completely separate. And then, when she was out one day, I left. I wrote a letter explaining why I was cutting contact, turned off my phone, and walked out. When she found out, the messages started pouring in. Then the calls. Then the threats. She was furious. She told me I would regret this, that I was ungrateful, that I would be back. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I was free. Or so I thought. It had been 1 week since I left. 1 week of no calls, no texts, no guilt weighing me down. Emily and I just finished setting up the apartment. For the first time in my life, my space felt like mine. No constant hovering. No walking on eggshells. Just peace. Then, on a quiet Saturday morning, the pounding started. The door rattled under the force of it. Fists slamming against the wood, over and over. Emily froze. She knew. We both knew. Through the peephole, there she was. My mother. Hair wild, face blotchy from crying, gripping her phone in one hand, like she had been trying to call me the whole way here. The shouting started next. My name over and over. Accusations. Begging. Demands. Emily pulled me away from the door, shaking her head. She whispered that we weren't opening it. I agreed. The knocks turned into pounding again. She was relentless. Then came the guilt. She yelled that she had nowhere to go, that I had left her with nothing, that she was homeless because of me. That wasn't true. Even before I left, I had noticed her spending habits. She never prioritized rent or savings. Her money went to gambling, online shopping, and fleeting luxuries. I had left enough to cover rent, but I knew deep down she wouldn't use it wisely. She just didn't want to. Emily tightened her grip on my arm when I moved toward the door again. I didn't open it. My mother stayed outside for almost an hour, pacing, crying, screaming. Then as suddenly as she arrived, she left. For a second, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe she had finally accepted it. Then my phone vibrated. Work email. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. HR wanted to meet with me. They had received concerning messages from a family member about my mental stability. I didn't need to ask. I knew exactly who sent them. I called HR right away. I explained the situation as carefully as I could, making sure they understood I was dealing with a personal issue, not a real concern. Thankfully, they were understanding. But it was a warning. She wasn't going to stop. By the time I got back to the living room, Emily was already scrolling through her phone. Her face was tense. She turned the screen toward me. My mom had taken it to Facebook. A long post, paragraphs of lies. She claimed I had abandoned her with no warning, that I had taken all her money, that I had changed since meeting Emily, and now I was under her spell. She called Emily a gold digger. The comments were filled with relatives, some of them defending me, others asking what was going on. A few had already sent me messages. Call your mother. She's your mom. You can't just cut her off. Family is family. Emily was furious. She told me this wasn't going to stop unless I set clear, unbreakable boundaries. I knew she was right, so I blocked my mom on everything. Phone, email, social media. Gone. That same night, my cousin called. He told me my mom wasn't broke like she claimed. She had money, she just wasn't using it wisely. She had been gambling. Online poker, scratch-offs, lottery tickets. She had always played, but I never realized how much until now. This wasn't about money. It was about control. The next morning, I wrote my mother an email, a final message. I told her I was done, that I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore, that I wasn't responsible for her choices. I told her if she kept trying to contact me, I would take legal action. I pressed send. The response came almost immediately. A single line, "You'll regret this." That night, she showed up again. This time, we didn't wait. Emily called the cops before she even had a chance to start pounding on the door. By the time they arrived, she was already gone. But I knew this wasn't over. Blocking her didn't stop her. Neither did ignoring her. She had already shown up at my apartment twice, and after I called the cops, I thought she would finally back off. I was wrong. It started small. A few vague messages from family members asking if I was okay. Then I noticed my name appearing in social media rants. When I ignored all of it, she escalated. First, the messages turned threatening. Then came the calls, blocked numbers, voicemails full of wailing accusations. I still didn't respond. That's when she showed up at my job. Security called me before I even knew what was happening. My mother had walked into the lobby and demanded to see me, making a scene about how she was my concerned mother and needed to talk to me about a serious emergency. She refused to leave. I didn't go down to see her. I stayed in my office, listening to security handle it over the phone. She escalated quickly, her voice rising, making accusations, claiming she was being abandoned, and that I was being manipulated. It took 2 security guards to escort her out. By the time I left work that day, I had already called a lawyer. I wasn't waiting anymore. The next morning, I started the process for a restraining order. I filed every message, every email, every call log. I included the incident at my workplace and her showing up at my apartment. I wasn't going to let her ruin my life any longer. That night, my phone lit up with an unknown number. Voicemail. She was crying, wailing, gasping between words, acting like I had ripped her entire life away. She said she had nothing left, that I had destroyed her, that I was heartless. Then came the family messages. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They came out of nowhere. Some were furious. Some were confused. Some were trying to be neutral. She's your mother. You can't just abandon her like this. She's really struggling. You should be there for her. Maybe she made mistakes, but she's still your mom. Emily scrolled through the messages on my phone, shaking her head. She was done with this. She told me if I didn't set a hard boundary, this would never end. The next day, my lawyer told me to keep documenting everything. If my mother tried anything else, I needed proof. Then, as if on cue, my cousin called. Apparently, my mom was in the hospital. A health scare. Something about her heart. It didn't make sense. She hadn't mentioned anything before, but she had always used health scares as a way to manipulate me in the past. I called the hospital. No patient under her name. No record of her being admitted. I called my cousin back and asked where she got her information. She said my mom had told the whole family she had a heart episode and was rushed to the ER. She even posted about it on Facebook. It was all fake. I didn't respond. I didn't call her. I didn't acknowledge it. 2 days later, I found out she wasn't struggling like she claimed. She had moved in with an old boyfriend, someone she had dated years ago, someone who had always let her use him for money and shelter. She wasn't homeless. She wasn't abandoned. She wasn't alone. She was just mad she wasn't in control anymore. A week later, the restraining order was granted. She couldn't come near me, my apartment, or my workplace. If she did, she'd be arrested. Emily and I sat in our apartment that night, for the first time in weeks, without any interruptions. No banging on the door. No phone calls. No family messages blowing up my phone. Then we checked Facebook. She had posted again. This time, a full rant about how I had turned against her. How I had ruined her life. She called me abusive. Said she had spent her entire life raising me only for me to betray her. But the comments were different this time. Instead of support, there were people questioning her, asking for proof, pointing out inconsistencies. Some even defended me. A few relatives reached out again, but this time, it was different. I think we were wrong. I'm sorry for doubting you. I see it now. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in guilt. For the first time, I felt free. The restraining order changed everything. My phone was silent. No more calls, no more unexpected visits, no more family messages pressuring me to make things right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Weeks passed. My job was going great, and Emily and I were finally settling into our life without constant interruptions. Then, one day, a cousin reached out. He wasn't calling to guilt trip me. He just thought I should know. My mother had been evicted. Her old boyfriend had kicked her out. Apparently, after realizing she had no access to my money anymore, he got tired of supporting her. She had no job, no savings, and nowhere to go. She tried staying with friends, but that didn't last long. She had burned too many bridges. People started distancing themselves. The drama, the lies, the manipulation, no one wanted to deal with it anymore. Even the family members who used to defend her were slowly backing away. Some of them still reached out to me, but their messages had changed. I see it now. I had no idea how bad it really was. I'm sorry for doubting you. Without my support, she had nothing to fall back on. Emily and I had a quiet dinner that night. No interruptions, no stress. My job was stable. Our home was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, my life was mine. But then, out of nowhere, an email appeared in my inbox. No subject, just a single line. I just want to talk. I didn't respond. A day later, another message. I've changed. I'm different now. Just one chance. Please. Blocked. Then another message came. this time through a different family member. She was sorry. She never meant to hurt me. She just wanted to explain. But the explanation was the same as always: how I misunderstood her intentions, how she only ever tried to protect me. She still wasn't taking responsibility. I ignored it. Then, the final straw. Aunt called. My mother had stolen money from a relative, a significant amount. It was over after that. No more excuses, no more defenses. That was the moment the family finally cut her off for good. No one offered to take her in. No one sent her money. No one tried to defend her anymore. She was alone. And I was finally free. Cutting her off should have been the end of it. The restraining order, the blocked numbers, the family finally seeing through her lies, it should have been over. But it wasn't. One evening, my phone rang. An unknown number. I already knew who it was before I answered. Her voice was frantic, desperate. She begged me to listen. She had changed. She had learned her lesson. She realized how much she had hurt me. Then came the guilt. She sacrificed everything for me. She gave up her life, her happiness, her dreams. She did everything for me, and this was how I repaid her? I let her talk. I let her spill every excuse, every manipulation tactic she had ever used. Then calmly, I told her the truth. She didn't sacrifice anything for me. She sabotaged me. She controlled me. She made sure I never had a life of my own. And now she was facing the consequences of her own actions. The sobbing started. The wailing. The gasping between words like the world was ending. I hung up. She called back. Blocked. A few hours later, my cousin texted. Some relatives were already talking about how I needed to be the bigger person, that I had made my point and should help her now. I ignored it. Then, a week later, she escalated. At work, a coworker casually mentioned something strange. A rumor. He had overheard someone saying I had a drug problem, that I had been in trouble for abusing women. It didn't take long to figure out where it came from. First, it was the usual accusations to family, manipulative messages. But when those stopped working, she escalated. She took to social media, twisting every event, painting herself as the helpless victim. Then, the lies got bigger. She didn't just tell our relatives. I started hearing from old acquaintances, coworkers, even distant friends. She was making sure anyone who would listen knew her version of the truth. I called my lawyer again. The next day, Emily found something even worse. A GoFundMe. My mother had started a campaign claiming she had been thrown onto the streets by her heartless daughter and needed money to survive. The description was full of lies. How I had stolen from her. How I had turned my back on her when she needed me most. How she was completely alone and just needed a little kindness. It gained traction. People started donating. But then, something happened that she didn't expect. People started asking questions. One of my cousins, one of the few who was still on my side, called her out publicly. If she was homeless, why was she still posting from her iPhone? If she had nothing, why did she still have access to online shopping accounts? Where was the proof that I had ever taken anything from her? More people joined in. Someone shared screenshots of her old Facebook posts where she bragged about living with her boyfriend. Someone else found her gambling transactions. At first, the donations trickled in. People who didn't know the full story sympathized with her. But then, someone dug deeper. Screenshots of her past gambling transactions surfaced. Others pointed out inconsistencies in her claims. Slowly, the tide turned. Donations stopped, comments turned hostile, and within a week, she deleted the campaign in shame. After that, she went quiet. No more calls, no more messages, no more dramatic Facebook posts. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. I got a promotion at work. Emily and I moved in together. Therapy was helping. I didn't second-guess myself anymore. I didn't wake up every morning waiting for the next disaster. Then, a few weeks later, a final update came from a family member. She had burned every bridge. No friends left. No family willing to take her in. She was couch surfing, jumping from one person to the next, each time getting kicked out faster than before. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't my problem anymore. After the GoFundMe disaster and her couch surfing streak, my mom faded into the background. No more messages, no more dramatic Facebook posts. For a while, it seemed like she had finally given up. Then, out of nowhere, an old friend reached out. He had news. My mother had a new victim, a 22-year-old guy she met through church. Apparently, she had spun the same story she always did, the struggling single mother, abandoned by her heartless child, just looking for someone who understood her pain. She told him she had so much wisdom to share, that she had been through everything, and could help guide him through life. He bought it. He let her move in. And just like that, the cycle started all over again. A few weeks later, the guy reached out to me. He had found me online. He was polite but cautious. He had started noticing red flags. At first, everything was fine. My mom had made herself seem kind and caring, like she just wanted to help. But then the mood swings started. One day, she was his mentor, full of advice and encouragement. The next, she was crying about how the world had abandoned her. She had already borrowed money from him. She had already started talking about how she had nowhere else to go. And when he mentioned he was thinking of moving in with his girlfriend soon, she shut it down. Suddenly, she didn't trust the girlfriend. She started implying that maybe the girlfriend was controlling him. That's when he got suspicious. So he looked me up. I told him everything. I laid it all out, how she had controlled my life, sabotaged my relationships, lied, manipulated, played the victim, and refused to take responsibility for anything. I told him if he didn't cut ties now, he would never be free of her. At first, he hesitated. She had made sure to paint me as the villain. She told him I was a liar, that I had abandoned my family for money, that I was just bitter. But then he started paying attention. The guilt trips, the sudden illnesses, the constant negativity toward his girlfriend. It was all too familiar. A few days later, he kicked her out. She lost it, screaming, crying, accusing him of being just like me. He didn't cave. She was homeless again. This time, no one would take her in. Desperate, she started reaching out to people from my past, old friends, exes, anyone who might still feel bad enough to give her a place to stay. It didn't work. Then, the final blow came. A cousin texted me my mom had been arrested, shoplifting. Something small, but enough to land her in trouble. It made sense in a way. She had burned through everything, her money, her enablers, her fabricated stories. She had always lived on borrowed time, financially and socially. Now, she had run out of both. And that was it. That was when the last of my family finally gave up on her. No more enabling. No more excuses. No one defending her anymore. Emily and I sat in our apartment, scrolling through our phones, watching as she finally ran out of people to manipulate. She had nothing left. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt. No second guessing. Just relief. Emily smiled and leaned against me. I was finally free. Months passed. Life moved forward. Emily and I took a road trip one weekend. A last-minute decision. Just the two of us, no work, no stress. Just music, open roads, and the kind of peace I never used to have. We pulled into a gas station off the highway, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Emily went inside while I stood by the car, stretching my legs. Then, across the lot, I saw her. At first, I wasn't sure. She looked different. Smaller. Thinner. Older. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled. She was hunched over, digging through her bag. Then she looked up. For a split second, our eyes met. She froze. So did I. I expected her to react, to storm over, to demand attention, to make a scene. But she didn't. Instead, she looked away, turned her back, kept walking. I watched as she shuffled toward the convenience store, staring at the ground, shoulders slumped. Emily walked out at that moment, noticed my expression, then followed my gaze. She asked if I wanted to talk to her. I shook my head. There was nothing left to say. We got in the car and drove off. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. No anger, no sadness, no second guessing. Just clarity. She knew. She finally understood that I was done. At my next therapy session, I talked about the encounter. My therapist asked if I had wanted closure. I realized I already had it. Later that night, I drafted a letter. I wrote everything I had ever wanted to say. Every hurt, every betrayal, every moment she had tried to control me. I never sent it. Instead, I donated to a domestic abuse shelter in her name. Not for her. Not as some kind of message. For me. To break the cycle. To make sure I never became like her. Over time, the family stopped asking about her. She was no longer my problem. Emily and I started talking about the future. Marriage. A family. A life completely free from the past. Then, months later, she sent one final message. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I never responded. I blocked the number. And that was it. No more guilt. No more chains. For the first time ever, my life was truly mine. A year passed. 12 months without chaos. Without guilt. Without her shadow looming over my life. Everything had changed. Emily and I had grown stronger than ever. She had been my rock through everything, and now we were engaged. We found a place together. Our home. Not just a place to escape to. My career took off. Another promotion. More stability. More control over my future. And for the first time, my life wasn't about putting out fires. It was about building something real. The family finally backed off. No more calls, no more messages asking me to make peace. The ones who used to pressure me, they saw it now. They realized there was no fixing what was broken. One afternoon, I got a text from a cousin. A quick, casual update. My mother was still struggling. No job. No stable place to stay. Burned every bridge she had left. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No pity. Just acceptance. She had made her choices. And I had made mine. I talked about it in therapy that week. My therapist nodded, listening as I went through it all. The past, the guilt that used to eat me alive, the way my life had changed. She said something that stuck with me. Survival isn't the same as happiness. For years, I had been surviving. Now I was finally living. One night, I sat down and wrote a post on Reddit. Anonymous, no details that could trace back to me. It was just a message for anyone trapped in the cycle. For the people who felt guilty for wanting to escape. For the ones who had been told their entire lives that they owed their parents something. For those who still felt the weight of obligation, even when they knew it was destroying them. I told them what I had learned, the power of boundaries, the freedom that comes when you stop letting guilt control you. The post blew up. Hundreds of responses, people thanking me, people sharing their own stories. Some were still trapped, some had made it out, some were just realizing they needed to. And that's when it really hit me. This was bigger than just me. My mother had tried to control my life. She had tried to keep me stuck. She failed. I was free. And I would never let my future children go through what I did. The cycle ended with me. At my next therapy session, I told my therapist about everything. The post, the engagement, the life I had built. She smiled and said 4 words. You made it through. For the first time, I believed it. That night, Emily and I sat outside, looking at our new home. A life we built together. A future we could finally focus on. No more guilt. No more weight on my shoulders. Just peace. And as I closed that chapter for good, I realized the best revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't proving a point. It wasn't waiting for karma. It was this. A life well lived.